You're listening to the Forum Podcast, a production of Calvin Theological Seminary. For nearly 150 years, Calvin Seminary has been a thought leader in Reformed faith and scholarship. We invite you to join us and our guests as we wrestle with the questions of mercy, justice, faith, and formation. We do not have all the answers, but we believe how we pursue them matters. This is the Forum Podcast.
What happens when faith falls apart and slowly begins to rebuild? In this episode, New Testament scholar and jazz musician Dr. Constantine Campbell, professor and research director at the Australian University College, returns to the Forum Podcast to share his story of burnout, collapse, and renewal. Together with Dr. Aaron Einfeld, Director of Lifelong Learning at Calvin Theological Seminary, he explores spiritual reconstruction and the need for honest churches and how jazz might teach us something surprising about grace. For the burned out and searching, this conversation offers hope that faith can still breathe.
How do we pull out of this? Again, I'm asking you as I'm not representing all Americans.
Yeah.
But how do let's pull out of maybe lessons that you've learned in your own experience with being on the receiving end with a version of Christianity that is at the same time life-giving, I think you said, and at the same time contrary to that. I mean, you outline a lot of blind spots. What's our way forward?
Oh,
right,
such a good
collectively.
question. Such a good question. I mean, I really feel that change is only possible if people are willing to be humble. It's the same in music.
Of course.
That's why the greatest musicians, almost without exception, are very humble. The way they've become great is because they believe they've never arrived. They're always learning.
Yeah.
And they humble themselves to that goal. And the church, Christians, need to be humble. That's why, the biggest sin in the Bible, the most biblical sin, is pride. And, I trace that through in the chapter on acceptable sins. Without exception, all through the scriptures, God even says in Proverbs, I detest the proud of heart. Like God hates the person who is proud. That's so heavy. Like feel that.
Strong language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And whereas God lifts up the humble, Jesus says the humble will be exalted, the proud will be lowered. And humility is the key, for anything.
Yeah.
In marriage, as a musician, as a teacher, as a scholar, as a Christian, as a church, as a national Christianity. If there's not a willingness to question, are we going in the right direction? Do we need to listen to critique? Do we need to think this afresh? Without humility, none of those things are going to happen. And sometimes, and unfortunately, this is what happens, and you see it all through the Proverbs. If you don't humble yourself, you will be humbled. And my fear for the American church is it will keep careening down this direction to the point of its own self-destruction. And the church will be decimated in America, almost by its own doing. And that is my fear, and I think that's a legitimate fear. And a lot of American Christians might think I'm really exaggerating and we're too big to fail. Well, again, look at Turkey, Look at England. There are more people attending mosques than churches in England. Okay? It can happen. And that was the center of Western Christianity. Americans still go to the UK universities for their PhDs. So it can happen. And the history of the church is full of it happening constantly. So, what are you going to do about it? You know? And I think you need to be humble, be open, ask God for help, and change course.
So where do you find hope these days?
Well, look, I find hope in the fact that God's purposes won't be thwarted. So if you what you really care about is the kingdom of God, ultimately it doesn't really matter whether the church dies in America or not. I mean, of course it matters, but it doesn't really matter.
Right.
So I find hope in the fact that even if the worst happens, like this could happen in Australia, where Christians are persecuted, like properly persecuted, not just like, oh, you're a nasty Christian, but, you know, thrown in prison or tortured or beaten like they are in China. That God works through that. That's where the church grows, and if that's actually what you care about, then that's a reason for hope. It's like I like it as Australia becomes more secular. I'm like, that's good for the church.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, kind of as I hear you talk, part of what I hear is this perseverance word. You know, we're interviewing and having podcasts about this topic of perseverance and really hoping to help people who are at this point of burnout.
Yeah.
Or at a low point, like a spiritually dry place. Many in the United States, some surveys came out during COVID, just emphasized for ministry leaders how many were considering leaving because it was just so difficult.
Yeah.
Or people are to the point where they have an experience like yours and they're ready to hang it up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. How do those folks kind of get to the loving part again with their faith when they've dismembered it into grammar and context and all this stuff?
Yeah. Look, I'm not an expert on burnout, and I'm sure you know a lot more about it than I do. But I guess some things I can glean from my own experience might be helpful. I don't know. But for me, getting to that place of, I don't think for me it was exactly burnout. It was more like flame out.
Okay.
Like it was tragedy and conflict and destruction and everything falling apart. But it did lead me to a precipice. Like with burnout, was like, do I jump off the cliff and this is done, or do I hang in there and yeah. So sort of parallel maybe, but for me it was the experience was a stripping away, which was painful, but good.
Yeah.
And everyone's using the deconstruction word or whatever, you know, and there's a lot of baggage with that now. But there's a good kind of deconstruction, which I experienced way back in music school. You know, you sort of get taken apart so that you can be built back better. So deconstruction just to be left as pieces on the table is not good.
Of course not.
But deconstruction to be reformed is great. So it's a painful process, but sometimes the deconstruction has to happen in order to get there, because you can't get that shape with the existing structure. You can try to push it and make it happen, but it doesn't. It's not going to go there. So you have to take the parts apart and rebuild it. And I experienced that. I experienced that personally, like in basically every part of my life, including music. And I experienced it spiritually. And all I can say is it was really good. And that reconstruction, though painful, was refreshing. Because it came back to things like I was saying before, the parable of the prodigal son. I just kept clinging to that image of the father and who the father is, and his loving heart, his heartbeat for the lost.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept clinging to that image. And what that meant was all the stuff about, you know, the new perspective on Paul and Greek verbal aspect and all the, you know, details just don't matter. Like, they're still there. You know, they have their importance, their place. But for me, spiritually, it's just irrelevant. It was stripped down. My faith became much simpler. And I think through that process, deeper and stronger.
So like growth actually was what pulled you out.
Yeah, growth. And, you know, we have the pattern in the Bible, don't we? That you go down before you go up.
Of course.
Death before resurrection.
Yeah.
Suffering before glory. I think that's what's happened with what burnout, the positive side, can be.
Mm-hmm.
You go down, you deconstruct, you let everything fall apart, and then God will lift you up. That's the way. The way to be exalted is to be humbled. The way to be great is to be terrible first.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not going to have true greatness unless you lower yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be co-glorified with Christ unless you suffer with Christ.
Yeah.
And you're not going to move to a new spiritual chapter
Mm-hmm.
unless you close the previous chapter.
Yeah.
So
To let go before you grab onto something else.
yeah, and I get why that's scary for a lot of people, especially when if you're a pastor, your job, your health insurance is all tied up. You know, your family is tied up with your job.
You read my mind about my next question.
Yeah.
So I work a lot with pastors. You know, through Calvin Seminary, we do continuing education. We have peer groups with pastors and ministry leaders and support them through their sustaining their call. And there is a grind to having to stand and deliver sermons week after week after week, many two sermons a week. And sometimes when you hear leaders talk, it's almost like there's an inevitability that it will start to feel fake.
Yeah.
Because the congregation is requiring,
Yeah.
at least how they're understanding it, straight up answers that are not threatening. And then you have up and down, like waves, your own personal faith. And so sometimes it's almost like an occupational hazard
Absolutely, it is.
to have to stand and deliver. And then if the pastors would say, well, I love jazz. I really love the way you talk about jazz theologically. But my congregation, they get terrified when I start talking about jazz because it triggers all their insecurities and anxieties about their certainty. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like you have some experience with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, what?
I think, well, like part of it is a culture problem that I perceive in American churches
Yeah.
and seminaries of a cutthroat. Something goes wrong, you're out,
Okay.
you're fired. And if that is in the background, that's terrifying for a pastor. Can you even admit that you're going to struggle with these things with your
Yeah.
board of elders or whatever?
Fear and doubt or
Yeah,
something.
because
right?
they're going to vote to kick you out
Yeah.
and get some new, and that's a real problem. I know of a church in Canberra, an Anglican church. Canberra's the capital city of Australia. For listeners who may not who think it's Sydney.
We got a few,
Yeah.
maybe not from Australia.
Where the senior pastor, the rector of the Anglican church, really went through about 18 months of basically mental illness, depression, spent a little bit of time in hospital, that sort of thing, but basically could not work. And they did not fire him. They paid his full salary for a year and a half. They had other people come in, take care of his duties, preach for him, and they just waited for him to get better. He's better now. He's not 100%,
Yeah.
But I'm like, wow. That's not an evangelical church, by the way.
Okay.
That's an Anglo-Catholic church.
Uh-huh.
But I'm like, wow, that was a loving thing they did because they recognized their pastor is a human being. And rather than throw him out, and sure, the church suffered through that time.
Yeah.
Because they did not have consistent leadership. They did not have consistent preaching. They didn't, they had people blowing in, blowing out. They suffered, but they suffered with him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they saw him through to the other end. And I'm like, that is a picture of the gospel.
Yeah.
That is a picture of God's love. And churches, I hate to say it, but American evangelical churches that fire their pastors because they struggle with some of this stuff for 5 minutes, I think is just a horrible travesty and a lack of love and a betrayal, honestly, because here's a pastor who's poured out their heart for you, for your congregation. They've dug deep, they've worked long hours, they've maybe neglected their family at various points. They work hard for your spiritual health, and then as soon as they struggle, you kick them out.
Yeah.
How could you do that?
Yeah. What a tragedy, right?
What a tragedy.
Yeah.
So I would love to see churches say, we love our pastor. He's struggling. He needs some time off. He's burnt out. Let's lovingly enable that to happen without any fear for his job, for his health insurance, for any sort of insecurity for his family. And now it's our turn to minister to him. So I guess some of that all plays into the professionalization of ministry, where it is a one-way transaction.
Providing religious goods and services.
Yeah, and they're the consumers,
Yeah.
and they're not getting what they're paying for if you're not providing. So that whole model is wrong. That's not the Christian model. It's not the New Testament model. The leaders of the church, according to Ephesians 4, is to prepare all the members of the church for works of service as the body builds itself up together in love. So it's the church that does the ministry. The leaders are just there to train the church to do that, help the church to do that. So part of this whole issue, I think, is through a wrong-headed conceptualization of what ministry is and what church is and should be. And maybe if we address some of those things, it makes it easier for a pastor to have to, so-called deconstruct or burn out and let that process happen until the healing happens and the resurrection happens and wait for that to happen. I think you have to go through that process of that deconstruction. And for me, as I've mentioned, it simplified things like a refiner's fire, but then the refiner's fire, the object that you're refining is stronger, right, and purer. And when I was doing my PhD, I spent some time in Oxford and had breakfast with a pastor over there from St. Ebbe's Anglican Church, and Vaughan Roberts, and he took me out for breakfast and said, I always ask PhD students, can you summarize your research in one sentence?
Yeah.
And I couldn't do it at the time. Not really. I sort of fumbled around and it turned into like a paragraph and whatever. And for me, I realized that was a learning point, because I'm like, until I can give that one sentence answer, I haven't really mastered it.
Yeah.
This interacts with another comment when I was a first-year seminary student, and the lecturer said, a lot of people think they're clever by complicating things. He said, I think the person who can simplify something is the clever one. And for me, that crystallized something too.
Yeah.
As it's not something to look down on, to simplify and to crystallize and make something easily understood. It's actually a difficult intellectual task to do that. And you have to actually really understand the subject to be able to do that. And I feel like a parallel there with my own sort of personal deconstruction. Again, I'm not really happy with that word, but you know the way I'm using it, is that simplifying and crystallizing. And then when it is like that, like for me, clinging to that image of the prodigal son, the father, and meditating on the father's love every day and what that tells me about who God is, became that crystallized vision of what this is all about, you know. And that is a profound blessing if you come out the other end.
Yes. Almost like the tension. So people will say they feel like have a mask on or a shadow self, or they get to this point where they're performing their ministry, feeling unsteady on their own.
Yeah.
An example will be someone preaching about grace, but feeling driven like they need to earn it.
That's right.
Even though they're preaching about it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like lean into that tension.
Yeah.
Don't run from it. Like that's a sign that you're about to grow.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? And lean into it. And go into it.
And observe it and do something with it. And I think, you know, that experience, I've definitely experienced that, like leading up to the inevitable conclusion of my first marriage. I was preaching a lot and I was teaching in class, you know, and I felt like a phony and a fake.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel I was able to be honest about what was going on.
Yeah.
Because of people involved, but also the way it would be heard and responded to. And it's soul-destroying.
Yeah.
You know? So I would say to any pastor who finds themselves faking it, you have to stop right away. You have to down tool, because that is bad for your soul.
Yeah.
You are creating that shadow self, which is a great way to put it, or a duplicitous self that has terrible ramifications for your own spiritual well-being. And I think churches need to be able to enable pastors to down tool when that happens. Do you know, speaking of preaching, so I was a pretty active preacher until the end of my marriage, and then I didn't preach again for 5 years. I didn't want to preach for most of that time.
Right.
The thought of it made me feel sick, and I was relieved that I didn't have to do it anymore. And often I thought, because I love preaching so much, I thought, at first I was like, how am I going to survive? Like, it'd be like, how would I survive if I don't get to play jazz? You know, it'd be like unthinkable. But I didn't miss it.
Yeah.
Partly because I didn't miss that conflict.
Yeah.
And that pressure. And I loved the opportunity to just work on what's going on with me. And when I finally got to preach again, I was a different preacher.
Yeah.
Totally different preacher. Really honest. Maybe too honest. But I know the people who heard that responded very strongly to that honesty, because I'm like, I'm not here to BS anyone.
No.
Like, I'm not going to be fake. And I'm going to tell you what I really think. And if that's hard to hear, well, I can't do anything else. So it was ultimately, I think I'm a much better preacher now. Like, it was a 5-year gap, but it had to happen.
Yeah. It's almost like, I think you said the word duplicitous, like, it's almost like, again, that's a signal, or maybe reframing that as an invitation to look inside.
Yeah.
I think I've heard other colleagues give advice to pastors to say, you need a place somewhere where you're not a player.
Yeah.
So if the church is anxious and uneasy about your uncertainty, find a place, a therapist, a spiritual guide, a spiritual director, a coach, somebody outside of the system where you can do that work to arrive.
Yeah. But I also think, I agree with that completely, but I also think wouldn't it be great if our churches are communities where you can just get up in the pulpit and say, this morning, I just want to share with you, I'm really struggling with doubt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do you know how many people in the congregation will be like, oh, thank God someone said that.
Right.
You know, because I struggle with doubt.
Yeah, exactly.
And if the
Yeah.
pastor can struggle with doubt and be open about it, it's a safe place for me to admit I'm struggling with doubt. And one of my mentors and friends when I was living in the States is Mark Dever, pastor of Capitol Hill Baptist Church. And he has told his congregation, I'm 49% agnostic.
Oh.
You know? And
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, you said that? But, you know,
Yeah.
it's DC, it's Capitol Hill. They're living in a difficult, challenging world. A lot of them working in government and, you know, they're being pushed and pulled in all sorts of directions. And spiritually it has an effect on them, right?
Yeah.
Because we're aliens and strangers in the world. What a relief. What a beautiful thing to hear that their beloved pastor struggles with doubt too. And it's okay. We'll get through it together. You know? That's what I'd love to see churches to be like.
Yeah.
Where a pastor can struggle and it's okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to hide it. Just
Yeah.
be honest, be transparent. It could be really bless people. You know?
Okay, so Con, I want to ask you a question to make some possible connections here. So you talked about your own flame out or burnout as you described it, and how that was a process of almost like a purifying process of getting rid of some things in you that were preventing you from being healthy. And you arrive on the other side, a better preacher, connecting in ways that you didn't 5 years before.
Yeah.
So what I'm curious and wondering about is whether there's a parallel to, say, the American church. You know, in the way you talk about in your book, evangelical church. But I think you could even make it broadly to the American church. Are we going toward a process of flame out or burnout because of the critiques about the judgmentalism, relying on political power?
Yeah.
I'm wondering about that, and I'm asking the question in a way it's almost even hard to talk about, to be honest with you, because it is so polarized politically that even saying things politically, like the electricity in the room just jumps up even by me asking. And so this is not a partisan question.
Yes.
And so I'd encourage the listeners, too, don't even listen to this as a partisan question.
Yeah.
This is a question about the state of the church. Demographically, it's on its decline. And maybe some of these things in your book, Con, right, are accelerating that. So I guess that's a long way of asking, instead I have this question of, are we headed toward some kind of flame out? And could that actually be potential for growth?
Yeah.
Walk me through what you're thinking about that, Con.
Yeah, I think I'm not a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but
I got my pen out. If you're going to give us some prophecy, I'm going to write it down.
the way it looks to me as an outside observer, and is it seems more than likely that somewhere down the road, the American church is going to go through some sort of deconstruction. The big question is whether it will be a forced deconstruction or a voluntary deconstruction. So I think it's not too late for the church to adopt a position of openness and humility to say, are we right about these certain things, these convictions? Are we taking the right courses of action here? Are we heading in the right direction? If that really happened in a widespread way, in a deep and meaningful way, then that will still lead to deconstruction, but it'll be a less rough deconstruction, one that you are inviting, and that would be a great thing for the church. If there's not that humility, if there's a sort of proud insistence of heading in the same direction and not addressing problems that I think are pretty evident in the church, then I do think more than likely there'll be a forced deconstruction. And I think that for two reasons. One, young people in the church are leaving by their millions. That's just a statistical fact. And it's, yeah, of course, young people have always left the church through history, and some of it's just, they're just not going to follow Christ. And
A lot come back, right? Later on.
They
in
often
life.
do.
Yeah.
They often do. And that's normal. But the numbers we're talking about are beyond that. And their own stated reasons are to do with the sorts of problems that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And they're disillusioned with the church and don't see another option. So they just leave. So the church's next generation or generations is not going to be there. The other, couple that with the fact that a church that is racked with these sorts of problems has a huge image problem with the outside world. And that is going to make mission difficult to impossible. When you sort of say, let me tell you about Jesus and God's love and his compassion and gentleness and kindness. And I'm like, that's not what I perceive the church as being about at all. I didn't see any of those things in the church. Rightly or wrongly,
Right.
that is the perception.
Yeah.
And if the church keeps going that direction, there'll be no mission and there'll be no future generation. So the church will face a catastrophic deconstruction.
And as you've said, anytime you make a category or generalization, that's generally true. Of course, there's exceptions.
Sure.
So as I'm thinking of the scenario where there's this decline of the Christian church
Yeah.
in America, it kind of depends on where you are in that system
Sure.
as to what the recipe is for well-being.
Okay. Yeah.
So there are churches that are leaning into threading the needle politically, being active but not partisan. Yeah, I guess it just depends on where you're from, it seems like,
Yeah.
in that system.
Yeah.
Is it here's my attempt at humility.
Okay.
So I'll ask a biblical scholar about this. Talk to me about the early church and the fall of Rome.
Yeah.
Yeah, did the fall of Rome, was that a purifying experience for the church? Did the church grow as a result of Rome falling? Maybe it's out of your... The typical scholarly answer is like, if this is not my dissertation, I would answer this. You can do that too. But it just made me wonder, because if there is this kind of fall of institutions, if the fears that many people have, actually on either side of a political aisle, about a decline of, an empire.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering, you can hear my wondering in my struggle to get this question is, is there some wisdom from the early church about how to deal with the fall of an empire?
Yeah. Well, I think there are two ends to that. And maybe I'll start with the end that you didn't mention that I would rather talk about first.
Go for it.
Is that the way that Christianity became established within the empire. So the first 3 centuries of the church, Christianity was more or less either formally or informally illegal and heavily persecuted. But then by the time of AD 312, when Emperor Constantine converts to Christianity, he's doing that in part because Christianity has become a huge movement within the Roman Empire.
Yeah, he's consolidating political power.
Yeah, I mean, like, apart from whatever other factors there may have been, but that was definitely one of the factors. And so the question is, the church in Rome grew exponentially, not only without political support, but against political persecution. And how did the church grow? It grew, by all accounts, Rodney Stark is probably the leading guy on this, leading scholar on this. By all accounts, it grew because the church loved other people. They cared for the sick and the poor and the marginalized, people with the plague, putting their own lives at risk, losing their own lives, caring for people that no one else in Rome would touch. And most Romans thought Christians were crazy, nutbags, for various reasons.
Yeah.
So, but we learn a few things here. One, the love of God enacted in serving other people, as well as through proclamation, grew the church exponentially. It had nothing to do with political power or legislation, and it was in spite of severe state persecution. And yet, in 300 years, it became such a huge force in the Roman Empire that the Roman emperor himself decided to become a Christian, because that's where the empire is going, right? So if you want to win an empire, that's how you do it.
So you're saying if you want to win an empire.
Yeah, but the goal should not be to win an empire.
Of course, I know.
You know, that's not the goal.
Yeah.
But my point is, if you want the church to grow within an empire or wherever you are, that's how you do it. The early church was not perfect, but a great model and example of showing the simple love of Jesus in everyday lives, to the point where it was infectious because they were different. You know, another Roman emperor, there's a classic letter, I think it's Emperor Julian, where, because the Roman Empire had no welfare system, it had no formal means to care for the poor at all. But he writes a letter saying, those Galileans, i.e. Christians, everyone knows that they care not only for their own people, but for ours as well. And they're making us look bad. We need to start caring for the poor.
Wouldn't that be great if that...
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that's inspiring.
Isn't
Just
that
to hear.
amazing?
Yeah.
The example of the church did change the state. This is a pagan emperor who hated Christians.
Yeah.
It is like, they're making us look bad. We need to do something about it too. So if you want to influence your community, your nation, your culture, be a simple Christian. Love other people through action. Love your enemies through action. And proclaim Jesus. And just let God do the rest.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't answer your question about the fall of the empire.
No, you didn't.
But
No.
I wanted
question.
to answer a different question.
I know, it's a dramatic question to ask. I just think as I hear you talk about that, it reminds me of conversations I've had with Chinese Christians in China and from China about similar things happening, the big earthquakes in 2008.
Right.
The Christians came in and they helped.
Yeah.
And they actually made the local leaders look really good because people were being taken care of.
Right.
And it was, okay, well, you're a Christian, but you're making us look good, so we'll let you stay.
Yeah. Yeah.
As a means of helping people after a tragedy.
Yeah.
So it just, as I hear you reflect on that, there's examples in our one-on-one lives. We don't have to go all the way back to Rome, probably, in the empire to think of examples of where that has happened.
Yeah.
Maybe at a smaller scale.
Yeah.
It strikes me as also maybe we don't need to overcomplicate things.
Yep. Yeah.
This is going down to that distilling of is just like simple acts.
Yeah.
In our personal lives in ways that we can control.
Yep.
Is what we're supposed to do.
And God's in control of the big picture.
Yeah.
Just take care of our own responsibilities.
Yeah.
Which is to love people. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Dr. Campbell, for joining me for this conversation. You know, we went in a couple different directions, but I think there's a common thread. And I'm going to call it jazz.
Okay. I'm fine with that.
And I'm going to call it jazz, but with a caveat of two jazz musicians talking together. Sometimes people just throw out and say, it's like jazz.
Yeah, yeah.
and they don't really understand what they're saying.
Yes.
Is that, you know, jazz has structure, and there's freedom within that structure.
Yeah.
To kind of create something in the moment. So we've created this podcast in the moment. And I think what I've observed and what I've heard from you is someone who's been formed deeply through formal practices, whether it's music or whether it's theological education. You've had formal disciplined study. And you've had the experience of your life.
Yeah.
We talked about the divorce that you experienced. I'm sure there's other key marker events where you experienced deep formation. And both of those have shaped you, but in different and similar ways.
Yeah.
They've worked together to help you to arrive to the classroom or to the jazz club with a sense of ease, where there's humility and confidence about what you're about to deliver. A confidence that you've been through difficult times. You've persevered through difficult times, and others have helped you through that in a way that I find just encouraging in our conversation about what we do with all the problems you wrote about in your book. As a witness to the way that we can experience continuous formation in our lives.
Yeah.
And how that can be infectious and inviting even for others.
Yeah.
In a sense, maybe because you're in Australia and I'm in the States, like a non-ancient presence about like current affairs here. But it seems like that's the non-anxious kind of gospel-infused breath that we're supposed to breathe out on everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been encouraging to me. I hope it's been encouraging to the listeners about persevering through and arriving to that kind of lighthearted, playful, but deeply formed, jazz group that we have together, which we call the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron. I found it encouraging too,
Good.
and I've enjoyed it immensely. So thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Forum Podcast. To learn more, go to theforum.calvinseminary.edu.